All right, welcome back, everybody. If you're just joining us, I'm Larry Williams, the director of Karma, and special thanks again to Don Berg for kicking this twofer off today. And we're grateful that Don could take the time to make the trip over here and do so while persevering through a cold. So we're going to shift gears now and get to our second presentation, and it's a real pleasure to welcome back to Karma somebody who is a longtime contributor. Karen Locke received her PhD from the Weatherhead School of Management at Case Western, and she is a faculty member at the College of William and Mary in Virginia, where she is the Pat and Margaret Walsh Professor of Leadership. As you may have gathered, Karen and I and Don and I go back a long time. Karen was very kind to jump in as one of the first associate editors when I was getting organizational research method started, and she served in that capacity for several years. Karen, if you take a look at some of her recent publications, they are in organizational research methods, organizational science, qualitative research and organization as in management, the International Journal, and the themes of those articles focus on things like building community, designing member review, but probably what she is most well known for is her work on grounded theory. She has a 2011 paper in the Academy of Management Annals, and is also very well known for two books, Grounded Theory, Management and Research, and Composing Qualitative Research. And we spent 13 years with Karma at Virginia Commonwealth University, just an hour down the road from William and Mary, and Karen came over many times for different types of workshops and doctoral student things that we were doing, and I'm very grateful for all that she has contributed to Karma over the years. So it's a treat to have her back. Join me in welcoming Karen Locke. You green?
I'm green.
All right.
Thank you, Larry. Thank you. Okay, it's a pleasure to be here, and I just want to thank Larry for his support of qualitative research. One of the things when I have this memory of, I was sharing with him last night, this memory of standing at on a stage in Richmond, Virginia, giving a presentation on qualitative research to an organization comprised largely of organizational psychologists. And certainly if you look sort of historically at how qualitative research entered the academy in the area of psychology, even though qualitative research was a part of some of the founding theorizing in psychology, for example, thinking about the concept of dissonance and that wonderful field study of the doomsday group that Festinger and his colleagues did. Nevertheless, over recent years, psychology has been not as, I'm saying inclusive, but qualitative research hasn't been as strongly represented. And one of the things that I appreciate that Larry has done is to make sure that it's had a presence in his entrepreneurship around methodology in management research. So thank you for that. Thank you for that, Larry. Okay, so what I'm going to be talking about today is actually three things. Two of the things are in the title. One of those things is coding. The second thing is discovery. And the third thing I'll be talking about at the end is the implications of those two, or the relationship of those two words for our theorizing. Just to locate myself, that PhD that Larry referenced from Case Western Reserve was 1989. And what has happened in understanding qualitative research since that time has really been quite significant. When I was trolling through my data, like doing my line-by-line coding on my dissertation, there were really I think there were just 2 or 3 books that were available. Whereas if you went into just SAGE's website and looked at qualitative research now, you would have thousands and thousands. So there's good and there's bad with that. But the point I'm going to make, Larry referenced that one of the things I'm known for is grounded theory. And that is because that's what was available at the time. And so my own development as a qualitative researcher has that historical arc to it, and I'll be touching on that a little bit in the presentation. So coding for discovery, that was the word that I want to focus on. And the Annals piece that Larry so generously mentioned is focused on discovery. This has been a part of a methods project that I have been engaged with two of my friends and colleagues, Karen Golden-Biddle and Martha Feldman. And what we have been trying to do is to bring forward and understand more clearly basically the discovery process in research, and particularly for us in qualitative research. And one of the things I say for me is part of what methodologically I've been trying to do is to understand how this thing works when it works well and what contributes to it. So in thinking about discovery, the definition that's up there highlights really two features of it. One way in which we think about discovery is literally about finding things, so coming across things that I hadn't anticipated seeing. The other aspect of that definition, which is really critical though, is the recognition piece. And one of the debates, certainly in grounded theory, has been around the extent to which theorizing should connect with observation when we're conducting a grounded theory study. My position on that, and sort of the consensus position now, is there is no seeing without theorizing. And Van Manen says it a little more bluntly. He says you couldn't pick up a rock without a theory because you wouldn't have a sense of weight. All of those things enter into it. So the point around discovery is that observation and interpretation are really braided together. You can't separate the two. So some examples of what I would consider discovery and why I would consider it discovery. Famous one, Diane Vaughan's work on the Challenger incident and how that happened. When Diane started that project, she understood the accident as likely resulting from failures to follow safety rules, failures to follow regulations. And in fact, what she found out as she went about her coding, went about prosecuting the work of a qualitative researcher working through her analysis, was when she looked at the incidents of what she understood to be initially rule breaking, that she saw in them many elements of rule following. And so that pulled her up short, and she then from there, considerably down the road after a while, landed on and understood what she was seeing as how mistakes can happen actually out of rule following, and developed the concept of normalized deviance from that. So discovery there in terms is how observation, selecting and following through on instances of what she understood and assumed was rule breaking, but when she looked at them quite closely, saw elements that actually contradicted that, saw elements of rule following, put those two together eventually and ended up with this concept of normalized deviance. So that's an example of discovery where observation and interpretation go together. Some other studies that I think are really interesting. Alexander Michel, who has a career focused on studying really investment banking. Now I think Alexander's maybe 14 years in. She keeps this amazing project, keeps going back to the same organization so that the depth of her knowledge is really considerable. Anyway, in her initial study, looking at two different investment banks, so detailing and charting the different processes through which those banks socialized their new hires. And what she discovered was that in one bank, that their practices were to subject those new hires really to a tremendous amount of uncertainty and ambiguity. So you would think that the intake process would be around establishing clarity about how we do things, who we are, all of those things. Well, at one bank, that wasn't the case. In fact, they pushed uncertainty and they pushed ambiguity. And as it turned out, that was the higher performing bank of the two. And so what Alexander then theorized from that was the importance of socializing, of teaching the management and the tolerance of uncertainty and ambiguity for organizational performance. And then a final study, I mentioned my friends Karen and Martha. So this is Martha Feldman's work on routines. Martha was interested in studying routines, and this early study was of a residence hall. And so what she did, with sort of informed by the routines literature, went in and started documenting all of the routines that were happening. And as she went through and documented the routines, she was following the routines over time. And what she noticed from one semester to the next and 1 year to the next, that the routines actually changed. So that was unexpected given the way that routines were defined. And in fact, she went through every single one of the routines. So routines for developing a budget, routines for moving in day. And what she found was that change was expressed in all of those routines. And that resulted in her really thinking about routines very differently. And at this point in time, we're quite far out from that particular project, she has a whole field of study on routine dynamics. So invented an area of research focus and concern from that one centralized finding with the conceptualization of routines that's different. So in all of those, right, discovery is about putting together what I am seeing and how I understand what I am seeing to end up with coming to see things a little differently than when I started out. And the focus on discovery, though, has been not always evident in our methodological discourse. So early on, and this is sort of the touchstone for me theoretically, Charles Sanders Peirce wrote extensively about how it is that we come to know things. And he's a pragmatist, American pragmatist philosopher. And he was fascinated by the process of theory invention and coined a term to focus on it, abduction, which I'll come back to. Then in the mid-1960s, as historically what was happening was that right in the university, different disciplines were becoming shaped up. There was basically institutional processes were taking place. New technologies for research methods were entering into people's toolkits. And what happened was that discussion around methods was focused largely on philosophical aspects of method. And researchers sort of separated out the notion of actions, practices, ways, logics associated with discovery from those associated with validation. And I would argue we became really preoccupied with validation. And the quote that's up there from Kordig basically summarizes a stage set for research methods where we assume that discovery is something that happens outside of method. And if I come up with a finding that's insightful, that's theoretically interesting, that makes a major contribution, it must be because I'm really smart, right? Versus that I engaged in practices that by following those practices enabled things to happen that allowed me to get to the insight. And so in thinking about and wanting to bring forward discovery, what Martha, Karen, and I have been interested is telling that latter story. Because I don't think about myself as smart. I have landed on some insights, and explicating more fully the processes that got me there, I think, is useful for me, and I assume useful for other people. So we end up in the mid-1960s really with discovery being pushed to the side, and it's something that happens outside of methodological procedure.